Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Lysha from Lysha Be Creative, and in today's tutorial we are going to be creating this alcohol ink swirl over a glittered cup. So this is a design that some of you saw in one of my previous tutorials. You spotted these on the Turner, and so I'm going to recreate that in a tutorial here for you today. So the original design inspiration actually came from Simply Snow Design, who I will link all of her social media accounts down below. Definitely go give her a follow. She has some amazing work. And so when I saw her alcohol ink swirl, I knew it was something that I had to try, so I did that on a couple of cups that I had during my holiday rush this season. So I'm going to do a very quick and simple tutorial for you guys to follow if you're looking to recreate this design style. So of course, everything that I use in today's tutorial will be listed and linked down in the description box down below. You can also find discount codes as well as links to all of my social media accounts, so definitely feel free to follow me on those platforms as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into today's tutorial. Okay, so I am starting out with a 20-ounce skinny from the Craft Haven, and I've already spray painted my cup with a flat white spray paint. So this is a cup that I had stripped. It was a previous design that I didn't care for, so I stripped the cup, which is why there's some imperfections on my cup, but we're gonna cover all of that up with glitter. So I'm gonna be using Mod Podge to apply my glitters, and the two glitters that I'm going to be using are Flurry, which is a chunky white from PGL Glitters, and then Fairy Dust from 4K Glitter Co., which is from Shop Vinyl Gallery. All of that will be linked down in the description box. So with Mod Podge, we want to get a pretty good coat on there, and I'm going to put a little bit more Mod Podge than I normally would because I'm using a combination of chunky and fine glitter, and so I want to make sure that my chunky glitter really does stick and adhere to my cup. So I'm going to go a little bit heavier than I normally would, but I want to make sure that my coat of Mod Podge is very even. Once I've got decent coverage around the majority of the cup, I'll then move to the bottom portion of my tumbler here and get a nice even coat there as well. With Mod Podge, I am going to have to do 2 coats of glitter. As I've told you guys before, I do typically prefer epoxy method, but when I'm doing single colors, sometimes it's easier and quicker for me to do Mod Podge because I can get it on the turner that much quicker than having to wait for my epoxy to dry. Okay, so with my full coat of Mod Podge on there, I'm gonna go in with Flurry first. Always start with your chunkiest glitters first, and I'm just going to kind of sprinkle this around the cup. I want some of these chunky pieces to show, but I don't want it to overtake the tumbler, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to lightly dust my cup with the chunky Flurry, and I really just love the color texture that you get from Flurry. It's got like a translucent look, but it also gives off like color shifts as well, like a purple and blue color shift, which is beautiful. Okay, so with that done, I'm just gonna put this on my stand, put away my glitter, and then I'm going to go in really heavy to cover the entire cup with Fairy Dust. So I'm going to cover the rest of the cup in its entirety with Fairy Dust. If you don't have Fairy Dust, there are a lot of other alternatives that you can use. I'll list a few of my favorites in the description box as well. White is definitely the glitters I have the most of. I've said it so many times in tutorials, but you cannot have enough white glitter, in my opinion. kind of missed the bottom there, so I just wanted to go back over that section and go over the cup again. I'm pretty low on this. Okay, and then I'm just going to take a pair of scissors and tap off any of that excess glitter. I'm going to let this dry for about 20 minutes, and then I'll go over this cup one more time with Mod Podge and go straight in with just fairy dust to make sure I don't miss any spots on my tumbler and that my tumbler has full coverage throughout the cup. After the second coat of glitter, I'm going to put this on the turner for 2 coats of epoxy, about 30 ml each, until my tumbler is smooth and ready for sanding. Okay, so my cup has gotten 2 full coats of Illuminate Quick Coat epoxy. So now I'm gonna sand the top rim and a couple of the sharp bits that I have just on the sides and make that smooth. So I'm gonna take a 60 grit sanding block and just kind of start with that top rim, just like I always do. I'm gonna take this upstairs and wash it with a little bit of water and dish soap.
Okay, so here's where things went a little bit left. So we're going to create the design with alcohol inks, and so I'm putting in my little paint palette here 4 alcohol ink colors. I'm actually only going to use 3 of them. I do use the silver, but I don't use a whole lot, and so it's not necessary. So I have Fog, I have a pitch black, which is from Ranger, and then the 2 metallics are a gold metallic mixative and a silver metallic mixative. So I'm going to start with Fog. So Fog is a kind of like a gray color. It definitely almost looks like black, but it's more translucent, so it does give off more of a gray color. So what I'm doing right now with my paintbrush is I am just creating where I want my alcohol swirl and mix of alcohol inks to go. So I'm using Fog as my base layer and kind of creating the swirl on the cup. The way that I like to do swirls is I like my swirl to, on one side of the cup, the bottom and the top of the swirl to be seen. So essentially it starts and stops on the same side when you're looking at that section of the cup. So just taking Fog and going through using my paintbrush to blend out and spread out those colors. The other thing I do a lot, especially if my alcohol ink starts to get away from me, is I'll blow on the tumbler in the direction of the alcohol ink so that the alcohol ink doesn't get too far off of the path of where I want those inks to go. You could use paintbrushes or you can use makeup wedges, which you guys have seen me do before. Certainly whatever is your preference. So now here is where the trouble happened, okay? So I am now using pitch black, and I'll be honest, it's the first time I've ever used it. And what I found was that pitch black is like the darkest black alcohol ink I've ever seen. I guess I never really anticipated that it would be that dark. And so I then decided to quickly get some rubbing alcohol, some 91% alcohol, to use a mix of the pitch black alcohol ink and 91% alcohol to kind of blend out or thin out the darkness of that color. So this is kind of where things went a little haywire. So if you're doing this original design, which I will post a picture of my 2 most recent cups here, then this is the technique that you want to use, but I definitely would recommend using lighter, more complementary colors. So I did a purple and red combination, and I also did a blue and gold. And so you're going to be able to do this with this technique I'm showing you right here. I definitely would just stay away from the darker colors, as at least the black did not work out exactly how I planned, but I'm going to show you throughout this tutorial how I'm going to trust the process and turn this cup right around. So once I've got the black on there, what I'm really doing with my paintbrush is really just trying to use my alcohol ink or my alcohol rather, to spread out all of that black. And what I noticed with the black alcohol ink is as I was beginning to spread that out with just the 91% alcohol, the black was changing colors. I was getting hues of red, I was getting kind of like this deep dark purple. And so it really was kind of a unique color that I was getting from this very, very dark alcohol ink color. So I kind of take a step back and kind of assess and look at what I have. I'm pouring a little bit more alcohol because my original cup is now completely dark black and I needed a little bit of a lighter color. So I'm going to go back in with fog a little bit and just try and lighten up some of the areas. I want there to be a little bit of contrast between where was my black alcohol ink and my fog or lighter gray, because I want to make sure that you're seeing some of that contrast. So now I'm going to go in with the metallic gold. This is a mixative, and so I'm literally just putting swirls of paint and then going over with a clean brush, and I am going over those sections with just alcohol. And that's to spread that mixative out and help it blend into the two other colors. So I'm almost getting like gold and silver highlights is the intention of this section, to just kind of pull out some of those other colors that I was able to get when I started messing around with just the black alcohol ink. So you can put your gold wherever you want. I just wanted it in places that would highlight. So along the edges, a couple of swirls in the middle, and I'm using a combination of my alcohol and blowing onto those sections to get my alcohol to spread throughout those colors, making just kind of a nice gradient and hue and mix of all the different colors. So it starts to come to look like this really like dark, moody, like grungy color for me. And so I'm just kind of right now just playing around and kind of deciding how I can still make this cup to be a really gorgeous styled cup. And so I'm kind of just toying and going back and forth with all of the colors and just trying to make sure that I have a good blend so that the colors look purposeful and not like I just threw a bunch of alcohol ink on a cup, which is what I was really worried about as I started this process and put that black alcohol ink on the cup for the first time. So when you want to clean up your sections where your alcohol ink has gotten where you don't want it, you definitely can just take a clean paintbrush or a makeup wedge with just clean alcohol, and you can rub those sections right off with that makeup wedge or paper towel. If you do it quick enough, it won't leave any residue or anything, but obviously if you wait too long, then you run the risk of leaving a little bit of a stain, especially if you're using a white glittered base like I am. So I'm doing the exact same thing with the silver metallic mixative as I did with the gold, and I'm using less of the silver because it didn't really give me exactly what I wanted. So I'm kind of adding that more so into the fog areas because the gray and the silver really complement each other, whereas the pitch black, after I had blended, really mixed well with the gold because we were getting those undertones of like red and a deep purple. So once I feel like I'm pretty satisfied, I'm going to stop touching this before I do something that's going to completely ruin the entire project and kind of walk away and come back to reassess. So we're going to fast forward to that part to where I decide to get my design elements together to continue the creation of this tumbler. Okay, so here's where my technique comes into play. So I decide that I feel like everything with leopard print, I feel like leopard print just makes everything better. So I had some extra spots from a previous project laying around, and so I decided that I was going to turn this into a swirl, kind of like a leopard print swirl, but obviously a little bit different because the focus really here is going to be on that alcohol ink versus in a leopard swirl where the focus point is definitely the leopard print. So I am just going to apply these spots just to kind of create another swirl area right along the alcohol ink swirl, but just of leopard print spots. And this is where I kind of start to have a vision for how I could kind of turn this cup around to really kind of turn into a very uniquely designed cup. So I'm gonna fast forward and speed up the process of applying these leopard print spots. The spots that I use are fuzzy leopard print. They're from Bear Trend Digi Designs. I will make sure to link them down in the description box. It's my favorite leopard print file to use when I need to do anything with leopard print, and I use them quite often. So I definitely will link that down in the description box so you guys can go grab that file yourself. I promise you will not be disappointed. They are, as I said, my favorite. So we're gonna fast forward to me putting this back on the turner after apply all of these spots where I feel like they're gonna go, and just a nice thin swirl along that alcohol ink section, and then we're gonna put it on the turner and add some extra pizzazz. Okay, so my cup is now back on the turner and I'm applying about 10 to 15 mLs of mixed epoxy onto my cup here, and this is going to give me a layer of epoxy to coat the cup, and then we're going to be adding some swirl elements to this as well. So once I've gotten my thin layer of epoxy on there, I am going to torch this and make sure to remove any bubbles, and then now we're going to move into adding some swirls and adding a little bit of alcohol ink into the tumbler to kind of enhance the swirl elements of the alcohol ink. So I'm splitting that remaining alcohol, or that remaining epoxy, excuse me, into 2 cups. I then also have a little bit of chunky glitter. This is Athena from Peachy Olive Glitters, and the 2 alcohol inks that I'm going to use for the strings of different colored epoxy is Pitch Black, so that very dark color that turned a lot of different colors, and then the Mixative Gold. So I'm just going to mix those equally into my little batches of epoxy here. I only did about 1 drop of the black for sure, and then I did about 2 drops of the mixative just to make sure that I had a full color throughout. So now I'm just taking my little stir stick and I am just dragging a little bit of that mixed alcohol ink in with my epoxy through my cup. So I'm really carrying this through all the way the entire cup. So I'm getting a little bit on the leopard print, and I'm also going to fill up that space in the center here where it's completely white. I didn't want to leave that section completely stark white. I just felt like it was too much of a contrast and didn't blend with the rest of the cup. So I'm adding that into the elements by adding that gold. So now I'm going to go in with the black. And the black does something a little bit unique. So similarly to how it changed colors when I was applying it directly to the cup with a paintbrush, it kind of does that same thing when you're applying it through epoxy. But what I did notice is that when it fully cured, it turned back to a very dark black color. So don't be alarmed if you start to see that kind of pitch black color start to change color a little bit. I had a little bit of green elements and I got a little worried, but it ends up turning right back after it's cured to that deep dark color. So now I'm just going to take my heat gun here and I'm just going to try and spread out those thicker sections of dyed epoxy to kind of thin those areas out, flatten that out, and then I'm just going through with my gloved finger. This is just something I always do, and I always like to go back through and kind of remove some of the epoxy in areas where it just kind of looks like it's pooled and not necessarily applied on purpose. So you can always go back and add more. You can also use a silicone stir stick to or a silicone tool to apply your epoxy. Whatever works best for you. I've used a glove finger, I've used my stir stick, I've used silicone sticks, whatever works best for you. So now to kind of bring out the hints of gold, I'm just going to go in with that chunky Athena and just kind of sprinkle it lightly throughout. I really am trying to make that focal point right now, that empty white space, so that it is not such a huge contrast, and adding a little bit of that chunky white to the cup. So this is a very messy process, so definitely make sure that you have wet wipes or extra things that you can wipe your hands on, especially if you're like me and you have to touch your cup with your gloved hand to get everything to look exactly like you want it to before you can step away. So I just continue playing around with this and kind of just adding elements where I think they need to be. With this process, I do like that I can add however much I want, and I do have the ability to take it away with my gloved hand. And then when I finally feel like I need to step away before I screw something up, I'm just going to torch it one more time and make sure I don't have any bubbles, and I'm going to leave that to cure for overnight so that I can add the decal the next day. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through really quickly how I created this decal. So I have the GoDaddy Studio app, and this is kind of what I use to create the decal. So what I do is I open up the app and I click a transparent background to get me started. And so this is just a transparent square, and now I'm going to go into fonts and I'm going to go into text and type out my text. So at the bottom you can scroll and pick what font you want. So I start with the Stay Wild, which is the quote or the decal that I want to add. And then what I love about this is you can just swipe through the fonts and it'll show you what they all will look like. So I love that part because you can't always do that in Cricut Design Space, which is kind of frustrating. You also can add more fonts to this. So it comes with a bunch of already free ones, but there are ones that you have to pay for. So I do have the paid version of this, so I can download all of the fonts, but you also can download fonts from outside resources to this app so that you can use them. So I decided to go with one of the fonts that I had already downloaded. So I'm just going to swipe to that, and I will link the name of that font. It's the font, one of the fonts that's already in the app, in the paid version, if that's something you're interested in purchasing for yourself. So once I've selected the font that I think I want to go with, I'm then just going to click the checkbox. So the checkbox is going to bring me to the next screen. And in the next screen, all I'm going to do is I'm going to size this and make it so that it fits the entire width of the screen. So I want the words "Stay Wild" to fit the entire screen, but I don't want them to go down to the next line, if that makes sense. So I want them to stay right next to each other. And make sure that it is as large as I can. And that's just to make sure that I get a really clear version of this once I upload this into Cricut Design Space. So once I'm done with that, I am then just going to click that little arrow out box, and I'm going to save this as a picture or a file, which will save right to my phone, and then I'll go right into Cricut Design Space and get this cut on matte black. Alright, so I have cut this Stay Wild file that I created on just some matte black vinyl, and I'm now going to reverse weed this just because the wording is so thin. I want to make sure that I don't accidentally ruin the file, so I am going to reverse weed this. So I'm going to apply my transfer tape to the entire section, and then using my weeding tool, I'm going to pull off the pieces that I obviously do not want to be on the cup. So you can do this the way that I'm doing this, which is right on the back side of the transfer tape, or you can also apply this directly to your cup and then just remove the spaces that you don't want. So completely up to you. I find this is the best for me, especially with lettered files like this that are super thin. I just find that I am able to get all the little pieces off when I do this reverse weeding right on the transfer tape versus on my cup, just because I end up accidentally pulling up the pieces I do want to stay on the cup when I try and transfer it to the cup and remove the pieces that way. But whatever works for you, this is just one of those tips and tricks that I have kind of learned from other creators over the time that I've been doing cups that has been really helpful for those small little files. So now we're going to go ahead and apply this to the cup. And so the area that I'm going to apply this is going to be in that section that was formerly white. And so I'm just going to put this at a slant right on the cup, smooth that out completely, and then remove the transfer tape right on. So after this is done, this goes right back on the turner for 2 final coats of epoxy, as you guys know. And so let's take a look at the final version of this cup. So here's a final look at the cup. So this obviously design was not exactly what I had originally envisioned in my head, but I am so grateful that I did see through this creative process, even when I had a few challenges in the process. I definitely am happy with how everything turned out and how I was able to pull that together. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Definitely comment below and let me know what you thought of today's cup. So if you haven't, definitely make sure to give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys again next week.